Closed captioning of this program is made possible by the Fireman's Fund Foundation.
Investor jitters as agreement on the debt ceiling and new job numbers fail to settle nerves on Wall Street. Will he or won't he? Is San Francisco Mayor Ed Lee going to break his promise not to run for election? Counties brace for an influx of low-level inmates and parolees now handled by state prisons. And a conversation with the director of Crime After Crime, a documentary about the long legal battle to free a domestic violence survivor incarcerated for the killing of her abuser. Coming up next. Good evening, I'm Scott Schaefer, sitting in tonight for Belva Davis. Welcome to This Week in Northern California. Joining me now on our news panel are Marisa Lagos, staff writer for the San Francisco Chronicle, Rachel Gordon, City Hall reporter, also with the Chronicle, and Tom Vakar, consumer editor for KTVU News. Well, it's been a roller coaster week in world markets, despite an agreement on the U.S. debt crisis and a better-than-expected jobs report. Tom Vakar, the credit rating late Friday of the United States was downgraded by Standard & Poor's for the first time ever. The White House contested it. There was confusion, but in the end, it looks like it is going to be downgraded from AAA to AA+. What does it mean?
Well, it's just a tiny downtick, and most of us would be just thrilled to have such a credit rating. On the other hand, it is important because it says to the world markets that the United States isn't quite as creditworthy as it was before. Now, this is the opinion of one rating agency, but it does have weight around the world. Now, I can tell you, because I was at the stock market earlier today, had this happened while the market was open, yesterday would have looked like a picnic compared to what would have happened today, and they deliberately waited. The second I heard that, my antenna went up, and here's what you have to understand. We make the debt deal, and the market slowly creeps down during the week, and they're pretty big numbers, but they're not gigantic numbers. And then yesterday, inexplicably, the bottom seems to fall out. I believe that somebody's going to have to take a look and see if somebody was pre-warned of this, because a lot of people made money on that big drop yesterday who were betting against raises on the market. And I think that there's a real question to be asked here if anybody was given inside information, because if they were, it's a serious criminal offense, and it just doesn't make any sense. And today they waited, and they waited until this business was over with the stock market. Now the weekend will come, but Monday we could see some real trouble on Wall Street.
So why now? What does this say about the debt agreement? As we sat around this table last week and said that if they got this deal done, things would settle down. It didn't happen. The opposite happened.
Well, because you got to look at the deal. The deal basically kicked the can down the road again. Basically what it says is that we'll make the big decisions come November. So we have uncertainty until the end of November, till Thanksgiving. Now think about what that means for financial markets and corporate planners and even government planners and all of that stuff. You have kicked the can down the road. In the first year of this deal, I think the cut is $20 billion. In the second, peanuts. In the second year, the cut is $40 billion, peanuts, and then the third year, things start happening. The reality is most investors were looking at it saying, this is not a very good deal for anybody.
But just a quick question, isn't that what's supposed to happen? If you're cutting it now, isn't that going to make the recession worse?
Well, that may be the deal, but if you're looking at this through the hard numbers, remember, the people on Wall Street are people who are betting real money, not kind of thinking about betting. This is real money, and they looked at that and they said during the week, this doesn't make a lot of sense. Yesterday didn't make sense to a lot of people because it just seemed to come out of nowhere, and I think that somebody's going to have to take a close look at these trades.
Tom, can you tell me in reality what's the difference, what your credit rating is? How does it going to affect us? How will it affect states and counties and cities and the general person who might want to borrow for a house or something? What does that mean?
Depending on who's willing to lend you money, if they think you're a little bit less creditworthy, they're going to want more interest as kind of a risk premium. Now, think about the United States. Every year we pay $250 billion in interest payments. So some of those creditors are going to say, well, you know, if you want us to roll this debt over, we're going to want a higher interest rate. So who's going to pay for that? taxpayers are going to pay for that, and the taxpayers will continue to pay for that for years and years to come. So this deal may turn out to have been like the FAA, a situation where they saved a little bit of money or they made a little bit of a point, but the reality, the financial reality of it is going to be
consumers made out with the FAA, though, right? You didn't have to pay taxes and things on airplane tickets.
Yeah, at the cost of something like $30 million a week to the Treasury. You know, it looks as though what you have is probably the most dysfunctional Congress we have seen ever. And it just seems that, you know, this is going to figure heavily into this debt business, because people are going to say, who will be making these decisions down the road about this? And they're going to look at that and say, the same guys that made all of these mistakes, the same women that made all these mistakes. I think that there's going to be real problems here coming up.
So I also heard that most of the airlines just jacked their prices back up to exactly where they would have been with the tax. But I'm wondering, I mean, do you think the fact that this happened on Friday evening, could it spell better news come Monday? What do you think will happen next week?
Well, what I think you have to understand is that this gives people at least 48 hours to digest this thing, to see, is this really that bad? Are we really going to be hurt that bad? And that's a good thing. It's always good to wait before you make a decision like that. On the other hand, the question is, what happens when you go into that trading floor on Monday and you're not sure about the creditworthiness of the United States, even though it's down a little bit? And the other question is, what do people around the world say? Because all these markets are intertwined.
There was also Friday a jobs report which was better than expected. It did show more jobs being created. So how does that figure into this? Is it? I mean, it's really in a good economy that would have been a bad report, but in this economy it was good news.
Well, I think the way it figures into it is people are looking at this and saying, okay, what does this debt ceiling do to help create jobs? And I think the answer is not a lot. So it's going to really be up to the private sector now to really try to figure out ways to create jobs, because the government isn't going to have the money to spend. And this could be one of those deals where we're going to look Monday and think, you know, what decisions did we really make as a country? And that we won't know until next week.
All right, Tom, thanks very much. Well, now we're going to turn from national politics to local. Supporters of San Francisco Mayor Ed Lee rallied earlier this week, urging him to run for office. Rachel, there's been a lot of controversy over this so-called grassroots group, Run Ed Run, Progress for All. Tell us about the controversy. Who are they? Who's funding them?
Right. The controversy is it's not really a grassroots movement here.
AstroTurf.
It is AstroTurf. It's really a few key donors put in close to $50,000 to get this grassroots campaign. What they did is they went out and collected about 50,000 signatures of people. We don't know if they're registered voters or not, who they were, but they went out, spread across the neighborhood, said, we would like this mayor, Ed Lee, who was appointed to be interim mayor for a year to fill out Gavin Newsom's term. We'd like him to reconsider and run. They have till August 12th to make that decision if you're going to run for mayor in the November election. What we're finding out is there were some donors who are have close ties to Chinatown power broker Rose Pack and to former Mayor Willie Brown. Both of them are big backers of Ed Lee. They say, look, we want you to back off on your promise when you said you weren't going to run for a full term. We want you to run for mayor. So these are people who've had city contracts in the past, people who are tied to some of the Chinatown Development Corporation, nonprofit housing there. Those are the people who are putting money behind this campaign. Now, whether they just funded it to get people out on the streets, whether that's going to make any difference is
well, and as you
unknown.
said, the mayor, when he first was appointed, was talking about the future and his future. And I want to play a clip. We have a clip from him speaking to Bay Citizen, which is an online news organization, in February. Let's listen to what he had to say then.
You promise something or you indicate there's something that we should be doing and you support it, you carry it out. And there are a lot of promises that have been made in the past that weren't kept. Then you either have a trust in government or you have a mistrust in government.
So, Rachel, that question of integrity and trust, is he going to throw it away by breaking his promise?
Well, this is what we have to see. First, he has not said yet whether he's going to run. He has told news organizations that he hopes to take over the weekend. We're expecting that there will be an announcement Monday. Most people are saying, yes, he indeed is going to get in the race. And it's going to be, how is he going to tell the public that this is what he wants to do? And I think there are a couple of ways to look at it. One, the public can say, politicians, they lie all the time. Other people would say he has the right to change his mind. He's done a pretty good job for San Francisco. It should be part of the democratic process. If he wants to run and we want to vote for him, we should have that right to do that. I think it's really going to resonate much more with insiders that maybe he's going back on his word than it will with the general populace.
But what about the body politic? Gavin Newsom said, yeah, I will be the mayor, and a better job comes along, and one that he decided he wanted to take, and he leaves town. Now you have a guy who said, I'm the city administrator, I am willing to do this, but I'm going back, and the deal was made and the agreement was made. What does it say to people about kind of the mobility and the ethics of people who hop around from job to job without fulfilling a job in the same way Sarah Palin?
Right. I mean, that's something that the voters are going to have to decide. Is he doing a good enough job, do they think, where it doesn't make a difference that he's going back on what his word was? How is he going to frame that? Because he's been saying from the very beginning, he said at the beginning, I don't even want the interim mayor job, if you remember. No, I'm not interested in it. Then he was talked in it and he took that. Then he's interim mayor, he's kind of liking, he's asked every week, do you want to do this permanently? No. And then slowly over the last 3 weeks, I'd say, he's slowly been saying, I'm not thinking about that job at this time. Things like this. This may be the last time I raise the gay flag on Pride Day.
Don't you think so that in some ways as well, I mean, what you talked about with the donors, who's behind him, Rose Pack is a very controversial figure in this town, Willie Brown, obviously, enough said. That also has the potential to dirty him up, right? I mean, if there are, if it is found that any, even if there were no laws broken or anything, that these, all of a sudden he's going from this great place where he's above everyone.
Right now he's citizen mayor. He's a longtime city bureaucrat, 20 plus years in city government. He then becomes a politician. I think, though, that he is popular as mayor with the general public. I don't think you're going to see people going after Ed Lee as much as you're going to see them going after Willie Brown and Rose Pack. And don't forget, it was the 2000 election that really turned politics on its head. It was all anti-Willie Brown, and that's when the Chris Daley's and the Jake McGoldricks and the Aaron Peskins, we got this progressive kind of insurgent board of supervisors come in because they ran against Willie Brown, and we're going to see that kind of boil up again, that same thing to try to get Ed Lee.
Looking ahead, we've got a big field of candidates. 2 of them voted for Ed Lee to be interim mayor, David Chu and Bevan Dufty. So how,
and John Avalos.
And John Avalos, so 3.
And Michaela Elliott-O'Peer.
Right.
The whole group. So obviously they're not going to be happy, but if he does decide to run, how's it going to change the dynamic?
Right. I mean, one thing we've seen at City Hall is it's been a drama-free City Hall, and after 7 years of Gavin Newsom, we had a lot of drama there, both on the personal front and politics. As Tom said, he's going to run for governor and didn't know what a lieutenant governor did for a living, and then he decided he's going to be lieutenant governor. We got a new mayor in there. We've had a real kind of even keel. We've got a budget process through, a Twitter tax break. We can go through all these things. People are working together, reaching across the aisle, and that's going to be washed out the window at this point because now all the gloves come off, and now it is the politician mayor, not just the citizen
back to the way it was, perhaps. We'll see.
He
still has to make it. Politics as usual. Well, one issue that could come up in the mayor's race is criminal justice, and that's because a new plan to reduce prison overcrowding will shift control of thousands of low-level inmates and parolees from the state to counties. It's called realignment. And Marisa Lagos, it's a big fancy word. Break it down for us. What is realignment? How's it supposed to work?
Well, I think first to understand why this is happening, we should take a step back and understand that really this all came about because of the overcrowding case against the Supreme that the Supreme Court decided this spring. Basically, the state has been ordered to reduce its population by about 30,000 inmates over the next 2 years. The Governor Jerry Brown looked at this and said, you know what, we need to do this, we can't just build our way out of this problem. So the idea here is that starting October 1, folks that are sentenced in superior courts around the state, if they have low-level offenses, non-sex crimes, non-violent crimes, non-serious crimes, which is sort of has a definition under state law, they will go to county jails to serve out their sentences, or instead of going on parole, they'll go on probation at the local level. The idea behind it is really that the state was never supposed to, house all of these folks, that there is more of an impetus at the local level to really do good programs, to find the resources, to try to actually rehabilitate people.
Well, let me ask you that. Resources, right. The county's broke, the city's broke, the state's broke. People getting out of prison have a lot of needs. They don't have jobs, they don't have housing, substance abuse. So
mental health.
Where's the money going to come from?
And this is why this is so controversial. I mean, I think that there is among the criminal justice community a real understanding that yes, this could work, but the state has sort of earmarked a little bit, about 1% of a sales tax to send to counties. How much money they get will be based on how many felons they usually send to state prison. So you already have people screaming that kind of punishes counties that maybe did institute more progressive policies to keep people out of prison and as contributing members. So the idea behind this is that it's not just about these inmates in the long term, that it's going to be about giving the counties more resources for these types of programs. But you're right, it's not there.
They're already saying there's not enough money for this program at the local level, but there also seem to be consequences down the road that we're going to get a new type of prisoner population at the county levels that we didn't have before, right? People will be serving 3 years in county jail instead of 1, and there seems to be some nervousness and skittishness among law enforcement officials about what kind of folks are we bringing closer to home, and might that have an uptick in crime because of that?
Yeah, I mean, I think what you're going to see is not that these guys are going to just be released. You might have lower level people, even lower level, the ones that were already in county jails to begin with may not be serving their sentences as long. I think it's going to really differ from county to county, and that's going to be one of the challenges here.
But given the economy, it's not like the supply of prisoners is going to run out. We're going to still be backloaded with prisoners coming into the system. And at the county level, if you're taking, spaces that are unoccupied in a year and suddenly they're there for 3, aren't we just going to overload the county system to the degree it can handle it?
Not as it's envisioned, and I think that there's fair criticisms and that there's the potential that, yes, that could happen. But I think that if this is done right, the idea is that these guys, we're not going to keep having this overwhelming recidivism rate, that the counties could do a better job in keeping people out of behind bars. Right now, 70% of criminals who are in jail or prison go back within a few years, and a lot of them are not going back for new crimes. They're going back for missing a parole meeting or having a dirty drug test. So if they're put into programs and actually help to succeed instead of given a one-way bus ticket, maybe we will actually reduce our prison population.
One of the questions everyone's going to ask, and there are people on both sides, is are we going to be more safe or less safe as a result of this? How does it play out?
Well, I don't know that you can ever really answer that question because there are so many unknowns in criminal justice, but I would say that given the absolute failure at this point of our prison system, I think what the governor and supporters are betting on is that it can't possibly be worse.
It seems like it's really going to be about the transition time, right? That in the long run, that this program could succeed and make it, but in the short term, if there are not enough resources and they're trying, all of a sudden the counties are going to be inundated with probation, with jails, with the programs which you don't have enough of right now.
Right, but look, I mean, I would say this, though. You have to understand that the sheriffs, the DAs, the probation officers are enormously powerful in Sacramento. And every step of the way of this, they're going to be in the governor's office and in the lawmakers' ears telling them what they hate about it. And so, yes, there are a lot of fears, and I think a lot of them are very valid. However, it's not as if on October 1, they're just going to ship back hundreds of thousands of inmates. It's going to happen over time. So I think we're going to see in the next year a lot of changes as the program moves forward.
All right, Marisa, Tom, Rachel, thank you all very much for joining me tonight. Our next story also relates to the issue of prisons. Debbie Piegler, a domestic violence survivor, served more than 26 years for the killing of her abusive boyfriend. 2 Bay Area attorneys worked to free her for 6 years. Documentary filmmaker Yoav Potash joins me in a moment, but first, a clip from Crime After Crime.
You knew we were coming.
My name is Deborah Piegler, and I was convicted of first-degree murder, sentenced to 25 years to life.
We have bad news and we have good news. Nadia Costa and I began representing Deborah Piegler shortly after California became the first state in the nation to adopt a law specifically designed to help incarcerated survivors of domestic violence win their freedom. It's a huge problem, a national problem, probably an international problem, and this law is just the first step. Debbie was connected to the murder of the man that abused her, but the evidence of that abuse was never presented to the court. And if she had been charged appropriately, she would have served a maximum of 6 years in prison. Instead, by the time we took her case, she had already been in for 20 years and been denied release by the parole board twice.
And Yoav Potash, thanks so much for being here. Compelling story, terrific film. What drew you to this story of the central figure, Debbie Piegler?
I think initially it's such a high stakes storyline. I mean, you have someone in prison for life with the possibility that she may be released thanks to this new law having to do with incarcerated survivors of domestic violence now being able to present the evidence of domestic violence that the court didn't know about back, in her case, over 20 years ago.
She, when we meet her in the film, is a very likable person. I'm sure even more so in person when you met her. Tell us about her. She was a model prisoner in some ways.
That's right. And really, when I met Deborah, that was the moment that I was hooked as a filmmaker on telling her story. And that's because I knew from her backstory, from being abused, from being forced into prostitution, she had been through hell, and yet she was an inspiring person to be around. She leads the gospel choir behind bars. She was teaching illiterate inmates to read and write. She was working the highest paid job available to an inmate.
It seems like if anyone would be a candidate for release after 20 plus years, she would have been it.
Exactly.
But there's so many twists and turns.
There are. Her attorneys worked for several years just to try to track down anyone who could verify the abuse that she had endured, so they could present that evidence to the court. And eventually they felt they had it proved. They had declarations from the men who actually killed Deborah's batterer, and because she didn't actually physically do anything to harm him, but she did sort of bring him to a park where she thought he would be beat up.
And he ended up getting killed.
He ended up getting killed, and she ended up being at least portrayed in court as being a cold-hearted mastermind of this calculated plot.
And tell us about the two attorneys, both from the Bay Area, Nadia and Joshua. They were not seasoned criminal justice lawyers. They were rookies. They were land use attorneys.
Exactly.
How did they get involved, and did they know what they were getting into?
They really didn't. They may have thought they did. I think they thought they were stretching their this was also in their first year as lawyers, like fresh out of law school. So that was another thing that attracted me to making the film, was this fish out of water element where
one was an Orthodox
that's
Jew,
right,
the other
that's
was a
right.
marathon runner.
That's right. They're an odd couple. They're fresh out of law school. They're very different from each other, and they've chosen as their pro bono side project, in addition to the land use law that they do, to try to get this woman out of prison. And one of the things that I think binds them to Debbie, that you sort of learn over the course of the film, is that they too have had their own experiences with domestic violence. And once you know that, you know they are not going to give up.
It makes sense. I want to show a clip from the film, and it has to do with when the attorneys visit Debbie in prison. They think they've got a deal with the district attorney's office.
They do have a deal.
And they're going to explain that deal to her. We'll watch the clip, and then we'll come back.
District Attorney's Office, you presented significant issues and evidence which were unknown or unavailable at the time of trial. Once the matter has been returned to the jurisdiction of the Los Angeles Superior Court, this office would be willing to offer a plea to 1 count of voluntary manslaughter in violation of Penal Code Section 192A, with credit for the years of imprisonment served thus far. Such disposition satisfies our office policy of requiring a plea to the charge which most accurately describes the defendant's criminal conduct. In context, it also serves the interests of justice.
Oh my God! This is really happening. It's like you knew it could happen, but it's really happening.
And of course, Yoav, it isn't really happening. It looks like it is. What happened to that deal that they thought they had, or that they did have, as you say, with the DA? And it was in the DA, we should say, Steve Cooley, who ran for Attorney General in the 2010 election.
That's right, the Los Angeles District Attorney, Steve Cooley. They had this deal in writing saying, quote, as you see, in the interest of justice, Deborah should be released. But before her attorneys could put that deal in front of the court and get the court to act on it, the district attorney's office said, you know what, we're actually not going to honor that, we're withdrawing. And they sent a second letter saying, we formally withdraw.
Why do you think they cared so much? Why do they try to keep her in prison?
It would appear that it has more to do with kind of internal politics and possibly external politics. How will this look, setting a quote-unquote murderer free? But we certainly heard that within the district attorney's office, certain people felt that they had been, their toes had been stepped on, or someone had gone over their head and that sort of thing. So there was a reorientation within the district attorney's office.
We've seen previous governors take a very hard line on parole of domestic violence survivors and many others. Does Jerry Brown seem to be taking the same tack, or is it different? He's
definitely demonstrating a shift, pretty significant shift. I mean, Democrats and Republicans would deny well over 90% of anyone that was ruled appropriate for release by the parole board. The governor in California has the power to overturn that, and most of the time governors would. Jerry Brown is not overturning the vast majority now. So it is a shift, and I think it's reflective of you know, like in your previous story, that we're spending so much money on the prison system.
Yeah, and of course this film focuses on one inmate. How many Debbie Pieglers are there out there?
Thousands and thousands. Across the country, there's well over 120,000 women in prison, and over 80% of them are victims of domestic violence.
All right. Well, we'll pick up her story, and I really encourage, I'm not Siskel and Ebert here, but I do encourage people to see it. It's a terrific film, and it opens this weekend in Bay Area theaters.
That's right.
All right. Well, that's all for tonight. Visit kqed.org/thisweek for past episodes, to sign up for our newsletter and podcast, and to share your thoughts about the program. I'm Scott Schaefer. Belva Davis returns next week. Good night.